Howard, welcome. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today.
Thanks, Lisa. Great to be here. My first podcast. I just want to throw that out there.
All right. Well, I'm confident that you are going to nail it.
I guess we'll see.
Yeah. So, Howard, you are part of a 3-generational dynasty in the Twin Cities, I would say. Pastor Properties was started by your grandfather?
Started by my grandfather. I don't know that I would say dynasty, but certainly a third-generation family business. And my grandfather, Herman, who I'm named after, started the business with his, I think with a couple of relatives. I'm trying to recall if it was his brother-in-law or cousins of brother-in-law, but my grandfather was first-generation immigrant. Kind of came here after World War I, and he had big personality, salesman, and the history is that prior to the commercial real estate business, we were in the coin machine kind of manufacturer distribution business. So
like vending?
Vending machines, right? So in plain terms, they basically had relationships with Bally's Corporation, the gaming corporation, who had slot machines and pinball machines, and with Wurlitzer, the jukebox.
Cool.
Folks. So we were a distributor for Bally's and Wurlitzer and some other groups, and we owned routes kind of throughout Minnesota and I think the Dakotas. And the company, which was Mayflower Distribution at the time, it was my great uncle, Sam Turan, and then later on my grandfather, Herman. And they basically went and sold these various machines to bars and restaurants kind of throughout the Minnesota and the Dakotas, and I think later Iowa. And then they think that they ended up creating a finance company where they financed it, but they were peddlers, right?
That's perfect. That's awesome. I love that story. And then they kind of said, "Oh well." Gosh.
So this is what happened. I think. I think my great uncle ended up moving to Miami after World War II. He opened an office down there, and then my grandfather, I don't know, lost patience or something like that, sold the business, and they went into real estate development, and they were developing single-family homes for the GIs that were coming back from World War II. So they started off kind of in Highland Park, kind of some of those smaller, single-story starter homes.
Wow.
They were doing that, and then eventually it kind of grew into developing grocery-anchored shopping centers because they had a relationship with the Applebaum's family, who had a grocery store chain called Applebaum's, those that are familiar with that.
Yep.
And the real estate kind of shopping center development business kind of started, I'd say, in the late 40s.
Wow.
Something like that, 48-ish.
Were they, I picture kind of when I got into the business, Pastor Properties had all these grocery anchored centers. There was several of them, right? They had to be the big, shiny new things on the block and kind of, compared to what else was there when they were opened.
So I want to say one of the first shopping centers in the Twin Cities, first grocery anchored shopping centers in the Twin Cities was Lexington Plaza on Lexington and Lavender, which technically was Roseville, but right on the border of St. Paul and Roseville. And at the time, it ended up growing into like 3 city blocks. There was 3 different grocers in there.
Wow, 3 different grocers in the same center.
Yeah, so this is before they had exclusive, apparently. harken back to those days.
Right. That'd be a little
great.
easier.
So that was one of the first ones, and then shortly after, Sibley Plaza, which on West 7th in Davern in St. Paul. I think that my grandfather bought that partially under construction from a guy named Walter Stepnitz, at least as far as the history goes. Maybe someone out there is listening and they can, help verify, but I haven't been able to find anyone alive that can kind of verify some of these details that have been part of the fable over the years. But I think back in the day, that was a very new thing, right? And with the suburban kind of expansion of all these metro areas. And ironically, so my grandfather was kind of doing that in St. Paul. On the Minneapolis side, a guy named Adolph Fine was doing the same thing in St. Louis Park. He's the guy that developed Texatonka.
Okay.
We recently purchased Texatonka and did a redevelopment there. And I've gotten to know Adolph's granddaughter, who we bought the property from, and it was a very similar kind of story. So
I love that.
Kind of ironic and somewhat circular how life works.
That's amazing. And so, but your dad then.
So my dad and his brothers kind of went into the business. My grandfather passed away, I want to say, in 1960. And my dad and his uncle were all, I think they were still kind of in college. So different time. I don't think there was a lot of great planning. And so they kind of had to bootstrap and figure out how to not go bankrupt and, kind of work with, stave off the lenders and the government and, all the tax planning, but they figured it out. Ultimately, my dad ended up working with his older brother in the business for a number of years. They ended up kind of parting ways, and my dad kind of, I would say, continued to grow the business, certainly not as aggressively as my grandfather did. I think those events likely colored his tolerance for risk.
It kind of goes every other generation.
Yeah, I guess, right?
That's interesting.
We joke that, it's like, or I used to joke, I don't know that I thought it was a joke at the time, but, the third generation, right, comes in and has all these great ideas of how to ratchet up the risk and, put the pedal to the metal. And the second generation is like, no, slow down, hold on, not gonna.
I think that's true, and you've done such a good job of that. But before we get to all of that, you didn't go right into the business out of college. You went to Madison, right?
I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison.
Okay.
I graduated, and then I moved to Chicago, and I worked for Mid-America Real Estate down there doing property management, and then I moved into product leasing, and I was there for 8 years, from '92 to 2000. And I would say that there was maybe somewhat of a plan where there was a thought that, or a conversation maybe informally between my dad and I, that it would be better to kind of go elsewhere and be able to bring some knowledge and some tools kind of back to the table. I think probably in combination with the fact that my dad had a huge personality, kind of larger than life, and I knew that I would probably get squashed if I just went to go and work for the family business after college.
Yeah, kind of better to figure out who you are out from underneath that.
Yeah, and so, I went to a different market where people didn't know me, and I could kind of spread my wings and learn and not always be known as, Eddie's son.
Yeah.
So, and the reality of it is, I think when I graduated in December of '91, so it was not a great time in the commercial real estate market, and I was out kind of interviewing with all these, companies, all these other real estate developers who knew my dad, and, I think the common refrain was, well, it's okay, so how long are you going to work for me before you go and work for your dad?
Right. Sure.
In a tough market, that's not a great prospect for finding employment.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So, yeah.
That makes sense. But I think you guys did a really good job of that. And then when you joined the company, you really kind of, you didn't go in and with all these big ideas. You probably had the ideas, but you just really let your dad, in my opinion, from my view, it seems like you really let your dad kind of run the business his way when you first started with the business. And then over time, you started to make some changes, but you were really, I feel like really respectful, and that transition seemed like it was very respectful.
That's good to hear. I think that we could do 3 more podcasts on family business and family business transitions and the challenges and opportunities with family businesses. We were probably no different than any other family business. I think it was probably helpful that it was just the 2 of us in the business, and there weren't other siblings or cousins. I think things become really complicated at that point. But I think that we were intentional about it, maybe not as intentional as we could have been, but we utilized outside advisors and family business consultants to kind of help us with the transition. We created an advisory board so that there was, somewhat of a buffer. And I think the intent, at least initially coming back, was the fact that, we had at the time a lot of these Class B centers that had been morphed and outpositioned as the population grew, and a lot of these junior box centers and more regional nodes ended up kind of becoming the new areas, and it kind of maybe sucked a lot of that retail energy from what was great locations in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And the thought was, okay, knowing that, how do we go in and try and add some new development and or redevelopment to help kind of stabilize the portfolio or kind of protect it as future population trends kind of continue. Maybe somewhat naive as mid-30s something or another when I came back to work in the family business. And I think one of the first things that you learn is that everything takes so much longer. Generally speaking, a family business, particularly if the generation right before you is not ready to let go. And so
I think that's really true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
and was he very receptive to change and new ideas?
Not really.
Yeah, that's kind of that's kind of.
I think at times, but I think the challenge with family business is that the older generation, it doesn't take much for the older generation to shift their mindset and go into parent-child relationship versus partner-to-partner relationship.
Interesting.
But it was a process, and at the end of the day, my dad passed away in 2012, so I got to work with him for 11, 12 years, and like one of the greatest gifts that I probably could have ever received.
That's amazing.
And well, it was
because your dad didn't have that opportunity to work with his dad, so it was really a blessing that you guys had that.
You learn to be a lot more patient, and as you start to see your parent age, maybe your perspective kind of changes, and you just learn to breathe and appreciate the time together. And I look back now, and if I wouldn't have come back from Chicago and I would have stayed there, I think I would have had huge regrets.
Yeah, that's really neat.
And so, yeah, so very, very, very fortunate and grateful.
So talk to me about my good friend Lisa's store.
Lisa's store, yes.
How did Lisa's store come to be?
Well, it's all about marketing, right? It's all about that hook. So I think that was one of Edward's great ideas.
I love it so much.
And
so tell everybody kind of what the
Lisa's store, in the past
on every sign.
So the company used to be called Pastor Enterprises, and on any vacancy, it would say, for information, please call Lisa, Lisa, last name store, Store.
I thought it was a real person for a really long time.
Most people did. She is. Right? You just could never get a hold of her. She was
one of the first women in real estate.
Yes, and she hired an intern, Philip Space.
I didn't know about Philip.
Yeah, we didn't have him on the sign. But,
funny.
Yeah, so just part of that kitschy, marketing thing.
I love that. I think that tells a little bit about kind of the culture and kind of maybe a little bit about your dad.
Yeah. So interesting, and I think. Right there's part of that culture, I think, in any family business, right, where things there are challenges, and there's challenges with how fast that you want to go, and the team that you have in place. Sometimes the team that you have in place maybe doesn't fit the vision of how fast you want to go, it makes it even more challenging when your partner / relative / father also doesn't want to move really, really fast. But
I would say that, you've been at the helm for a little over 10 years now, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say, so my dad, prior to passing away, slowly kind of developed Parkinson's. And so he really slowed down kind of tremendously. And I don't know that we necessarily knew, it wasn't diagnosed necessarily as Parkinson's, but I would say a year or two after I came back, he had a open heart surgery, and he really slowed down after that. So, like a lot of family businesses, I think that things just transition in kind of a slow gravitational way. And it's not like there's any kind of announcement. It's just that someone's got to be there kind of making the decision and kind of pushing the direction. And it kind of happened after that. And I think it probably allows the previous generation to let go of the things that they don't really want to be doing. And I would say that in our case, that was maybe the operational side of the business. My dad was always... he was a salesman. He was always gravitated towards
the deal.
Yeah, the deal, right?
Yeah.
And the people, the relationship. And so he would always want to have some piece of that, which was great. So we kind of, worked around that and started to make that transition. And then, and I think that was happening. And then, I mean, the reality of it is, once he passed away in 2012, it really did give us more of a mandate and more flexibility to do different things that would have taken a lot longer to kind of convince him.
Well, you had like a real vision. I mean, you kind of had a real vision for saying, I'm going to take this, this great business, but bring it into, current times, and also, make some investments, take some risk, and change your portfolio from being to what you always were known as to something completely, maybe not completely different, but something different. I mean, and with image and the whole, you did such a good job. So tell me kind of what your thinking was and where
so I think probably right post GFC, the retail landscape was changing pretty drastically. Everyone was afraid that there wasn't going to be any more bricks and mortar. Amazon was taking over the world. Everyone was going to, just sit on their couch and shop online, which in fact they did do, but that was, for call it an 18-month period during COVID.
Right.
I think, we realized, okay, we we are in some of these suburban markets where the depth of the retail categories are not deep. Maybe there's actually only one kind of tenant on the regional or national side within that category, and if they ever go away, like we've lived through right enough of these downturns where it just takes so long and it's so painful to kind of get back to the point where there's market kind of momentum. And so I think our thought was, and it's not like we came up with this ourselves. We have a lot of great partners and friends that we're constantly talking about where the world is going. So what that led to was this idea of sell off the lesser quality kind of suburban centers and invest in better locations, because if you invest in better locations, we might not necessarily know what the use is or what that retail piece is, but we know that people are going to be there, and we know that it's difficult to take an intersection, say like 50th and France, and say, oh, well, all of a sudden 50th and France is, not going to be, the dense destination that it is, and it's going to move 6 blocks further west, right? That's part of it.
Can't happen.
That's part of real estate, right?
Yeah.
It's part of the kind of the built environment. And so if you focus in on those areas that you really like, you don't necessarily have to know what that next use is going to be, right? You just have to be there. You have to be relevant. You have to create the type of space that that retailer, restaurateur, maybe it's an office user, maybe it ends up being some sort of residential development or project in the future. I think I would say in a certain way it was taking our neighborhood roots that we really started with my grandfather and kind of getting back to that in a certain way.
Interesting.
And I think it's just a focus on density. So, we kind of said, look, we're going to focus in on more dense neighborhoods, urban, first ring suburban. It led us to investing in some mixed use properties. And
was there any hesitancy to that, to kind of, you correct me if I'm wrong, but your pastor was all retail.
All retail.
And now pastor's not all retail.
Yeah, now I would say that we are, retail mixed use, ground up multifamily, but all with that same neighborhood approach.
Okay.
Right? So, and I think the retail is in our DNA, right? The retail is, the retail's that magnet, that hook, that special sauce that makes multifamily or mixed use. It's makes it better. It's more, in financial speak, it's more creative, hopefully, but it definitely makes things more interesting. And there's less and less of us out there that stuck with retail, and I think when you've been in retail for a long time, or that retail kind of subset, you maybe have the patience to understand it, because it is a lot of hand holding, and it is a lot of one-on-one relationship with the owners, and learning about those businesses, and trying to think from the consumer perspective of what's important, what does the consumer want, how do you get ahead of the consumer, and I think for a lot of other the other real estate kind of food groups, traditionally they haven't had to dive that deep into their tenants' businesses.
Great point. It's a
Right?
totally
We've
different
always
animal.
had to do that. Particularly if you're working with mom and pop tenants, which I would say we always have. I want to say that something like 60 to 65% of the portfolio is our mom and pop tenants.
Which is
independents.
amazing, because it makes it very interesting, right? Versus just
I mean,
but
I
it's
think
not easy.
I think I looked at our stats, because we've always done business with a lot of, call it, first generation Americans. There's kind of a high ethnic tenancy base within the portfolio. I think I looked at the stats, and 40 or 42% of our tenant base is minority and women-owned businesses.
Wow,
So,
that's really crazy. And part of that is because some, there's just a real motivation. I mean, there's for first generation immigrants, they have less to lose, so to speak. They're willing to take that risk, right? And it's a big risk to open a business and to lease space. And
I think there's entrepreneurs all over the world, right? And right, people are historically, right? People have always been coming to the United States, and I guess if you're not going to go and get a white collar job someplace, and you're entrepreneurial, and you come from your country, and I don't know, you were a restaurateur there. You're like, well, I want to open up this,
I mean, my
an
grandpa
Ethiopian, restaurant, or
Yeah.
a Russian deli, or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think our locations, because they have historically been in denser environments, those generally were located where there were higher percentage of newly immigrated populations. So it was logical that they wanted to open up in
their
the
neighborhoods. Yeah, absolutely.
And which is interesting, right? I mean, we gives us an opportunity to really learn a lot about a lot of different cultures.
Yeah.
It makes things more interesting, right? I mean, there was a period of time, certainly, when retail became very stale, vanilla, and bland, and the antidote to that is interesting local, right?
Plus, I think when times get tough, kind of the big national names don't have a problem just ripping out of your center. Whereas, these folks that own their business and have put so much into it figure out how to get through the tough times and kind of hang in there a little bit longer. At least that's my experience in the couple of downturns that we've had.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, when you're personally on the lease and it's your blood, sweat, and tears, you're going to do everything possible to make sure that you succeed. If you're one of 200 stores and it doesn't, meet the threshold, and
that's somebody
it's
in
losing
some
money,
room.
they're going to close the store.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, and I think that one of the really great trends that we believe is happening right now that just makes our neighborhoods and our cities more interesting is the fact that people want to shop local. They want to support their local businesses. People are always interested in, opening up a new business, a new restaurant, a new concept. And if you can create the environment where you understand that, and you can lower, the barriers, and I think you can be accessible. I think people want to meet with the owner, or at least the ownership group, and know that they're not dealing with someone 2,000 miles away, that they're meeting with, with people that are interested, that are invested, that, are interested in their success, and that you have this kind of shared vision of mutual success, which I think that's a lot of what works in neighborhood retail.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a real partnership, really, between landlord and tenant, and unlike office or industrial, it seems like there's way more involvement, like you're saying. So it's a partnership.
Yeah, for sure, right? I think that, we are constantly in our underwriting process. We're constantly meeting with folks, trying to understand the business, trying to help them share from our experience what we've seen with other tenants. We're by no means experts in retail, but we can at least point out what we've seen in the past that has worked and what hasn't. And if we can get creative and flexible, in some way, shape, or form, with the tenants to help them out, that one, it's good business, and two, I think it really does strengthen those relationships, kind of for mutual success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sounds good. So, so what do you see? What do you have in the works? What are you working on now?
Well,
where's this? Where are you taking this machine?
So I think we, over the last, I'd say 5 years ago, we kind of created two separate companies. We have our portfolio company, which is essentially our assets, our legacy assets, retail, mixed use, some multifamily, primarily owned by the family. We have a separate company called Pastor Properties, and we third party out all of our leasing and management. So we got rid of, we took that kind of.
Tell me about that decision, because that's a pretty interesting decision. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into that, because
Yes.
it's that's not an easy decision to make.
I was at a conference. I was at a ULI conference with my friend Stu Ackerberg, who's been a really good friend and mentor to me, both professionally and personally. And Stu said to me, "Howie, what is it that you want to do?" And I list off this, list of 5, 6 things. He's like, "Okay. And of those things, what would you say that you guys Pastor Properties is really good at?" I didn't have an answer. He said, "I'm going to give you a little bit of advice." He said, "I think that most companies can do 2 things really well, maybe 3. So you just listed off asset management, development, leasing, management, maintenance, acquisitions. You got to focus, right? Figure out where you want to be." Ultimately, that led to to this decision that we really wanted to focus in on asset management, acquisition, and development. And we had been trying to really put a lot more energy into our development company, and we're not getting traction. It led to a really challenging decision to basically say, okay, we're gonna not do our own leasing, management, maintenance, all the day-to-day services that we'd done for 60 plus years.
Yeah.
My dad was probably turning over in his grave as I was making this decision, and we basically said, okay, we're gonna third party all that out. The unfortunate part is it means that we basically have to downsize by 2/3, and we were really intentional about it, and very upfront kind of with the team, and used our team as a way to go out and kind of solicit third-party providers, and ultimately we chose a third-party provider with the understanding that they were going to interview the folks on our team and kind of bring them over. And ultimately, what I said to everyone is that it is not living up to our values if your leader, me, is not passionate about the business that you guys are in. And I'm passionate about the development and acquisition side. I'm really not on the management and leasing side, and we're not going to grow that business. And so if you're committed to learning and growing, I'm not living up to my integrity if I'm going to tell you we're going to continue in that business and we're not going to grow it. And it was probably the one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. I mean, had known these people for 20 plus years, some of them, right?
Wow.
It's a family business.
Right.
So to show up in that way and kind of be the guy that's making that change was heavy.
Wow.
And what ended up happening, I think, just by being open and authentic about it and having a plan, is that a number of those people ended up going over to CBRE, who we had hired at the time to kind of do our third-party management, And we said with everyone else, look, we are gonna help or kind of place you elsewhere, and so that's what ended up happening. That was, I don't know, 5 years ago or so, and it did allow us to really focus in on the development side, and we also kind of created Pastor Development at that time, which was more of a sweat equity model, using outside capital for ground-up development opportunities. We've done a number of our multifamily projects kind of through that Pastor Development entity. The family, right, will generally invest in those deals, but we're going and raising outside capital for those. And,
interesting.
So we redeveloped our old office in St. Paul on University Avenue into a 154-unit multifamily building that opened up about 8 months ago. We developed a apartment building across from Texataga called Volo, which is a 112-unit townhome and multifamily project that just opened up Feb 1 and was already like 70% leased.
Wow, fantastic.
And we are in development right now in partnership with Bader Development on a project in Northeast Minneapolis on 13th and Tyler, next to a project that we're a partner in called the Broadway in Northeast Minneapolis. So
what was the learning curve like to go from, owning and managing retail, which is a pretty, not easy, but it's the same kind of thing over and over again, and the numbers are pretty easy. Development has a few other moving parts. How did you tackle that one?
Yeah, I would say that we have always done retail development, right? But multifamily development is a much different animal. And I think the strategy was we were going to go and partner with kind of best-in-class multifamily developers because we don't know what we're doing. We think we can learn, but let's go and find other groups that we are aligned with from a value standpoint and have a similar vision, and let's work together. Our first deal that we did with Bader Development across from Ridgedale, we had the site. It was the old Highland Bank site. It was like a 3-story 1980s Class C office building, and we bought that. I think we were coming out of a 1031. We bought that building, and we sat down with Scott and Rob Bader and said, okay, what do you guys think of this site like for multifamily? And this is before they were, right, we were doing, suburban multifamily kind of development in these retail nodes in the Twin Cities. And we knew it was a great retail site, but the numbers just didn't quite pencil to tear this thing down and just do single-story retail. And surprisingly, Scott Bader got back to us. He's like, it's an amazing multifamily site. And we're like, really? Why? So that ended up turning into a partnership where we still own that property. And, we were kind of the retail experts. They were the multifamily experts, and we're kind of learning from each other. We're doing another deal with them right now, as I mentioned, in Northeast Minneapolis. But our St. Louis Park deal was the first deal that we did kind of solo, and I think we had learned enough with the various partnerships that we had done where we felt like if we had the right consultants, that we could handle the multifamily development. So
are you doing what you love now?
Yeah. I think that getting up every day and being passionate about what you do is super important. I tell that to my kids, particularly my kids that are in college right now. They're like kind of...
Well, and you have to be so proud to pack the 5 boys in the car and drive them past those apartment buildings and say, look what we did.
It's fun. It's fun. They like it.
Do you even have a car big enough to put all of your children in?
The good news is that, right, so my oldest is 20, my youngest is 13. I have 3 drivers. And at a certain point when they start driving, you don't have to have the extended cab Yukon to drive your kids around because you're not, they're
every day
they're
gets
of
a
that
little
age.
easier,
But
right?
yes,
That department.
yes, so-
But your projects are something you have to be really proud of.
It's really we are, and it is right part of the, I think, family business and responsibility that you have is to help explain to the next generation why you're able to enjoy the things that you do in life. It's because of the sacrifices of those that came kind of before
100%.
us. And I think that being grateful and living with a grateful disposition is a lot more enriching and leads to a more meaningful existence, right, for everyone. So I try and infuse those conversations, whether they're paying attention to me or looking down at their phones and watching TikTok, and whether it's being absorbed, I'm not sure, but you keep
Well, you're
trying.
a great leader and a
Thank
great
you.
visionary, and
Thank
I
you.
can't wait to see what you do next.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks so much for joining me today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.